Good evening. This is episode 2 of 13 Minutes to Midnight. Tonight, I'm going to talk about a few dates in history. I'm going to talk about uh, uh, Castle Bravo. If you don't know what Castle Bravo is, you're going to find out, and it's something that I'm going to share a video with later that I can't put on here, but it's fascinating. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about presidents, a little bit in a project I did in my classes. But first, let's talk tonight about a couple things that happened on March 2nd throughout history. Uh, in 1629, a guy named Charles I, monarch of England, you know how monarchs of England are, they can be a little crazy, uh, dissolves Parliament. If you don't know anything about England, Parliament runs the British Empire. They completely dissolved it over a war and taxes, you know, the whole thing. Fast forward 20 years later, he needs Parliament to come back and all that, and he gets beheaded. And then that leads to a whole, what they call some civil war and the rise of Oliver Cromwell in England. I'm not going to go into that. I won't bore you tonight on English history, but today, 1629 dissolved Parliament. More interesting, in 1836, Texas Independence Day. I'm sure Texas people are living it up today in Texas, and deployed with a Texas unit many years ago. They love Texas and their flag and the history behind it. So today is the National Texas Independence Day in history. And a little bit more Missouri history here from the middle part. 1867, Jesse James robbed a bank in Savannah, Missouri. Jesse James is not a good person. I'm going to say that many times. He is not a good person. His gang robbed a bank in Savannah, Missouri, ultimately resulting in one man's death. And then in a more sombering day in history as well, in 46, 47, Ho Chi Minh is elected the president of North Vietnam. And Ho Chi Minh, if you know Vietnam history, will become the pain in the butt to to America as he leads the forces that ultimately will prevail in the Vietnam conflict. And one thing about Ho Chi Minh, if you study history, he modeled himself after the great American general Washington. So that's a little bit of just some day in this history. Now moving on to some more history stuff today specific. Seen two conflicting dates on this about the next event I'm going to talk about. This was something I did last week in my class, but February 28th or March 1st, depending on the date. And I don't think it was a leap year when this happened, but the event known as Castle Bravo test. First off, this is put you where we're at in the world. Here's my atlas that I've used before. Here's a map of the world. The event I'm going to talk about, Castle Bravo, occurred in the Marshall Islands, and I don't have a precise, and I'm not going to get precise here, but if you kind of look down here, Marshall Islands, way out in the Pacific. Now, Marshall Islands, way out in the middle of nowhere. This is the 1950s, the start, and really not the height of the Cold War yet between the United States and the Soviet Union, but this is where we get the first significant test of massive nuclear weapons. In 1954, this really gets kicked off, and I think it was one of the first mega tests, but the Castle Bravo was a thermonuclear warhead that was developed. I believe the design was called the Shrimp, but I'm not going to get all technical. I mean, who cares about the Shrimp design? But essentially, it's the most powerful bomb ever created by the United States and detonated. Put in perspective, this little espresso cup from France that I got last year is Hiroshima, Nagasaki. Maybe a little bit bigger than it should be, but Hiroshima, Nagasaki size. This is Castle Bravo. You know how it could fit in there. Maybe a little bit not perfect comparison, but you could see significant size difference and bulk that both of these containers can have. So you can see, and I think it was about 1,000 times more powerful technically than Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 15 megatons is Castle Bravo. When you see the photos, and I'm going to share a link in the discussion and the comment stuff later, just for copyright purposes and everything that I showed in class, and you'll be utterly amazed. It's like the apocalypse and just this sheer insanity as watching this Castle Bravo explode. This now, a couple years later, The Soviet Union detonated their own bomb of thermonuclear capable. This is the Tsar Bomba compared to Casa Bravo. And I don't know the exact equation is, but you can see as we get our little coffee scale here, or hot drink scale, you can see escalation very quickly in the size of bombs that were used in the 40s and 50s. Fortunately, the only one ever detonated on actual people is the Hiroshima and Nagasaki one, the little espresso cup. As an interesting note, talking about Castle Bravo, I know a lot of the juniors and senior level classes that some schools teach on the beach. Castle Bravo test actually inspired the writing of that book because the fallout was so great from Castle Bravo that it actually went outside the safe zone that the United States had designated. In fact, it hit some of the Marshall Islands nearby, vaguely some of the remote islands. They actually had to evacuate people. In fact, let me check my notes here. A Japanese ship, the Dango Fobukuru Maru or something like that, Japanese, I think it was the Dragon 5 or whatever, fishing boat, about 30 people on it, accidentally wandered into the test zone, and they hit the fallout from it, and they got acute radiation poisoning pretty significantly. One of the members died 6 months later from it, and then some other side effects from that. So this whole event in the Marshall Islands is actually on the Bikini Atoll was significant, and from this you see a lot of devastation and just the sheer power of nuclear bombs. And this was a whole new level, and this actually put protests in Japan, and it was an international event. All that being said, the one thing to realize from this event was just the sheer magnitude that could happen. And one thing I'll share later, and I did a little video today at school, but I don't know if I'll share it. It's kind of goofy. But one of the things that the United States did was civil defense, back home, was preparing students, getting under their desks, getting in the hallways, if a nuclear attack. And the reality is those would have done nothing to save the lives. Anything. It was more of a security blanket comfort factor of getting under your desk, practicing your drills, going to the fallout shelters. More of that was just mostly just a warm fuzzy in your heart that you're not going, you're going to be doing something. Now, as we move on to the last part I want to talk about for this 13 minutes to midnight, and this one's going to be a little bit quicker one, is as we look into, I did a president, the best president tournament in class, and both hours did it, and Reagan won in 1 hour and Truman won in the other hour. And it was interesting seeing the kids break down. They had about 15, 16 presidents they could pick. I kind of narrowed it down. No 21st century presidents were eligible just because of, I think you need a generation to really evaluate any presidents. But look through all that, and Reagan and Truman came out on top. And as we're in this next presidential cycle, and I'm not going to go into who you should vote for or anything like that. That's not the point of this. But I'm going to leave you with a quote from Truman, one of my hours things, but he's talking about when you're looking at a president or person. And it's interesting, this is what he says in his memoirs, and this comes from Where the Buck Stops. It's from his personal writings, memoirs, etc. He says, how do people ask, do you know if you're voting for the right man? And I'm going to say, he would have said a woman. No, looking at Truman, he would have probably been accepting of that, but he's obviously using the context of the time. Or if someone like me, and get the point where you have some power in a political party, how do you know if the fellow you're pushing to be your party candidate is the best man in your party at that time for the job? Those are difficult, possibly impossible things to get to a place of responsibility. You can't just tell in advance whether you're talking about a general in the field or in a military situation or the manager of an alarm firm or bank or a president of the United States. You can never tell if a man is going to be a figurehead or a leader when you nominate them and elect them president. You've just got to pick the man you think is the best on the basis of his past history and the views he expresses on present events and situations. Then you sit around and do a lot of hoping, and if you're inclined that way, a certain amount of praying. Basically what Truman's saying here is, you can worry all day about if you voted for the right person. He goes on here, don't think backwards, but just vote. Pick someone, go forward. And he goes later on in this area, he said most people that are become president want what's best for the country. And I would say that is true to a certain degree, but he's basically says pick someone, rally behind them, support them, and most of the time they're going to do what's best for the country. And I think in these uncertain times, sometimes as we get all caught up and stuff, I think the words of Truman do ring true, and you need to rally around a president, Because sometimes we may hate the person as elected president, but if we rally around them, we can make them a better person and really help this country, move forward. And Truman is the best example of this. As I told the kids, the reason why I think 20 years is necessary to evaluate a president. Truman, when he left office, was one of the most unpopular presidents. Now we look back, historians look back through a historic lens, one that is less biased, a lot more focused on results. Truman's a top 10 president. I think he's definitely top 10. I'm biased. He's from Missouri a little bit. I may have named my child after him. But I think Truman was one of the most common sense presidents as far as he, grew up not rich, highly educated, came from a common background, military general, and I could go on and on, or not military general, but military officer, served in World War One. I could go on and on about Truman, and he's not a perfect man. He has many flaws, but I think we can gather a lot from his writings there in this day and age. So I thank you for tuning in to 13 Minutes to Midnight. I will be updating my website, hopefully putting some content out there and getting some more information, and keep checking out my daily This Day in History. I hope to look in the next coming weeks, hopefully do this weekly. I want to look at the president's cabinet, and I'm going to start with Washington and work forward, examining president's cabinets and significant men they had in their administration or women, and just seeing their impact. So 13 Minutes to Midnight, signing out.